So today we want to talk to you guys about Google Cloud Security. So traditionally, organizations have looked at the public cloud mostly for cost savings or, to augment private data security capacities. However, Wayne and I starting to talk to customer more and more, we see that there are more and more organizations are starting to look at public cloud for security, realizing that, the cloud providers such as Google can invest more people and money that Ron had mentioned about to deliver more secure infrastructure and solutions. So at Google Cloud, that is the trend that we're seeing. We have a very unique position to provide a single stop end-to-end solution, as Ron kind of mentioned about, from a secure global platform to running a mission critical applications, to securely collaborate and protect your data with Google Workspace, formerly known as the G Suite, as everybody know, and a single pane of glass to really easily manage users' devices and apps with cloud identity, securing endpoints and access platforms with Chromes and Androids, the mobility. We provide a modern security infrastructure from the user to the devices, to applications, to the platforms. So again, an end-to-end security solution. Just want to do a real quick audio check, and everybody hear me okay and see my screen okay?
Loud and clear, you look good, my friend.
Awesome, perfect, thank you, Wayne. So in terms of privacy, Google is very clear about our commitment to our customers' data. So the rule number one is that your data belongs to you, nobody else, not Google or anybody else. And what that also means is really Google never sells your data or using it for advertising. As a lot of our competitors, we heard from our customers that there's a lot of myths that's going around how Google uses the customer data. I can assure you that that is not how GCP or Google Cloud approach to customers' data. Again, your data is your data, and all of your data is encrypted at rest in transit by default. And we're going to talk about a little bit about that a little bit later. And we never give government entity any backdoor accesses or our privacy practices and audit it like everybody else against the international standards. So these are the most important rules in our mission to digital transformation, giving the customer the trust that they need to build great things. So how does Google Cloud help organizations with their security? First, we provide protection from threats through a secure foundation and an infrastructure that is designed, built, and operated from ground up with security in mind, right? And secondly, we're constantly expanding the capability to provide you guys with an array of controls that you can use to help meet policy, regulatory, and business objectives. And finally, Google, as I mentioned before, Google works really hard to meet our compliance responsibilities and provide those capabilities to the customers to make their compliance easier. So first, let's talk about the protection that you get from building on Google infrastructure foundation. This is a typical view of a security that everybody wants for their data, right? Their infrastructure. You see the fortress with walls and everything, but this is really a typical real world security, right? Where it's just it's not where it's supposed to be. So at Google, our approach to security is very, very simple and begins with only two words: just trust nothing. And from there, what that really means is that our infrastructure doesn't rely on any single technology to make it secure. And because of that, among other security measures, Google was not affected by the recent SolarWinds hacking event. So as you can see here, we embed security in each layer that delivers defense in depth at scale. Other cloud providers may describe a similar stack of capabilities, but the way Google Cloud approach many of this is unique. So first of all, our hardware is Google controlled, purpose-built, and hardened. Any application binary that runs on our infrastructure is deployed securely. And we don't assume just any trust between the services. We use multiple ways to establish and maintain trust. The infrastructure was designed to be multi-tenant from the beginning. So the data stored on our infrastructure is automatically encrypted at rest and distributed for high availability and reliability. Now the communications and traffic, even at intra-cluster level, where virtual machines and virtual machines communication are actually encrypted in transit. So finally, with confidential VM, which I'll show you a little bit later in more detail, is that the data can also be encrypted in memory with the virtual machine, within the virtual machine during processing. So there are many steps that Google takes to create a multi-layer physical and logical protection. One of the protection is the Titan chips. This is the Google server, a custom built, right? Most of our all of our servers are custom built, and they don't include any unnecessary components like video cards or peripherals that can introduce vulnerability. And this same goes for hardware. Things like low-level software and our operating system are all stripped down hardened versions of Linux. And furthermore, we designed this and included this hardware specifically for security, like the Titan chip, a custom-built security chip that we use to build hardware root of trust in our servers and peripherals. So you can see that this is built in the server, storage, network, everywhere is using this Titan chip. So through this, we have greatly reduced the vendor in the middle problem. If a vulnerability is found, we can take the steps to immediately develop and roll out a fix. We don't have to depend on anybody to roll out that fix for us. And I'll address a little bit more on that with the Spectre meltdown that we recently had a few years ago. So another big differentiator with Google Cloud is that our global network is unmatched. All traffic, whether it is within the region or across the region, as you see here, our regions are basically the blue dots that you see, right? So each region will have multiple data centers or availability zones within them. And the blue dots are the regions for high availability, reliability, scalability, as well as DR, disaster recoveries, and those type of use cases that customers are coming to us about. So these blue dots, even the communications between them they stay on the Google network backbone. So they don't leave Google backbone network at all. And with recent announcement of Network Connectivity Center, customers can now leverage the Google network as their backbone to connect their on-premise data centers and remote offices and branches securely and reliably. Very powerful and robust.
Tristan, could I add one thing to that?
Yes, sir.
So when Tristan talked about NCC and our infrastructure, who cares, right? Well, obviously everyone should. One perfect use case, I was working with a global customer 2 weeks ago, and they were trying to figure out how they can basically transit across basically the Americas, out of country, and then back in country, but then do it securely, right? So as Tristan mentioned, right, the encryption on our backbone, the glass and ground that we have, transatlantic across the pond, as the expression goes, all of this is stuff that Google owns, right? The subsea cables, this is our property, and we want to make sure that we leverage that. And then you start looking at NCC when, and Shazad at Aviatrix, good to see you, my friend. Look forward to your part next after us. But a lot of different things that we have in the mix right now with regard to GCP, this is for your benefit. We've heard a couple of other partners today mention SD-WAN. This is a big component that we partner with Cisco on to make sure that we can provide the service to you. So this picture that Tristan is showing you, that customer example that I shared with you before, security was the only reason that we were able to partner with them, and to be able to take their data and move it across our glass is a privilege that we esteem to, but then more importantly, it's a protection to you and your business.
Very good point. Thank you, Vang. So as I mentioned before, once the data reaches our infrastructure, it is actually encrypted at rest, right, by default. There is no extra effort required by the customer. This is another key differentiator from the other cloud providers where encryption is inherent in all of Google's storage systems. So think about all of the different storage systems, from databases to data warehouse to object storage. It is not an add-on feature that customers can turn on afterwards. It is just inherently there. It is turned on by default. You can't turn it off. Now, as you see here, Google encrypts the data before it's being written to the disk. So what that means is that when the data is first chunked and broken up into pieces, then each chunk is encrypted through the industry standards, the envelope encryption method. And the encrypted chunks and wrapped with encryption keys are then distributed across Google storage infrastructure. It could be across the region, mostly around or within the region, across availability zones for high availability. So even if an attacker were to compromise an individual key or somehow get physical access to the storage, they still can read the data because they have to piece all of these different data chunks back together first, which would be nearly impossible in itself, let alone finding all of the keys to decrypt them afterwards. Now, this is the confidential VMs that I had mentioned about. This feature is actually really easy to turn on, as you see here. It's focused mostly on encrypting data during processing. Google doesn't have access to the encryption keys, and by using the secure encrypted virtualization, or SEV, confidential VMs include in-memory encryption with no significant performance penalty. So that's actually, you won't, as an application running on these VMs with confidential VM turned on, you will not see any you should not see any performance penalties. And as you can also see here, it is very easy to enable this feature. Just tick a checkbox and you can run any virtual machine workload on that virtual machine. No code changes required. Now, recall earlier that I showed you guys the typical view of the security of a fortress with walls around it. Imagine those walls were like firewalls or VPNs as security perimeters in the digital world. What if you don't have to build these perimeter walls, but still offer the services and applications to your customers and remote employees? This is what zero trust from inside out and ultimately beyond core enterprises. So Wayne and I never have to log into a VPN to access internal Google resources. They're always publicly available and they're locked down from the inside out, right? If we don't have access to it, it doesn't matter where we actually at, we won't be able to get access to it. So Beyond Core builds on Google's pioneering work in this area and make these capabilities available as a cloud service. So it not only can protect applications running in Google Cloud, obviously, but also in other clouds such as AWS, Azure, and SaaS applications like Salesforce, Microsoft Office 365, and even on-premise web apps. Google is a big believer in multi-cloud, so we invest in services such as Beyond Core that will be able to play well in. We realize the customers are not going to be out in one cloud provider. Eventually, they're going to think they want to leverage the best from the best, right? Using the best feature from the cloud provider that provide the best. So we want to be able to make a service that's actually available in multi-cloud environment, such as Beyond Core Enterprise. So then it's a very heterogeneous solution, right? So it supports TCP services like SSH and RDP for remote access. And you can also leverage Chrome on top of it to protect users from online threats and how data is actually being accessed. So for example, within Chrome, the browser or the OS, Beyond Core can check URLs, in real time to help prevent users from visiting malicious websites and those type of things. Now, this service should require no introduction, as I'm sure all of you had a chance to find some parking meters and traffic lights before. So the core of ReCaptcha is really a fraud and bot protection capabilities. But with the enterprise version, it offers additional capabilities that you see here, such as tuning your websites to a specific risk model for false positives and false negatives. And ReCaptcha's adaptive risk analysis engine can adapt future scores to fit the model. So ultimately, your customer don't have to find those annoying parking meters and traffic lights, and just making it more seamless for the user, where you will present those things if it detects that there's a higher risk scores. So I'm sure you guys all have seen or heard of the critical and really scary Spectre and Meltdown vulnerabilities a few years ago. But many of you may not know that these vulnerabilities were actually discovered by a Google research team called Project Zero. And they helped coordinate in an industry effort to actually fix this issue. So net, there was no interruptions or downtime to our customers patching these vulnerabilities. In fact, we had not even one single support call as a result. So it really demonstrates that Google continued to invest heavily and still leading the industry in security. Now, this goes back and reinforces the point that I was making. Google makes security a priority, right, and invests heavily to protect customers' data, and continue to invest significantly to improve its security posture and capabilities. So one of the fun facts that Ron had already mentioned about that we have 9 consumer services such as YouTube, Gmail, Google Play with more than 1 billion users worldwide. And these services use the same technology that's available to you that I just mentioned. So they truly are battle tested and at scale like no other. Now, let's talk about security controls. You can use a security control that helps you to meet policy, regulatory, and business objectives. As I mentioned before, Google is committed doing its part to keep customers' data secure, but security really is a shared responsibility. I'm sure you guys have heard of this many times before, and requires collaboration. Well, this chart is by no means definitive, but it basically shows in general that as you go higher and higher in service offerings, as in the forms of from infrastructure as a service to platform as a service to software as a service, the responsibilities on your shoulder as a customer gets lighter and lighter and lighter. So when you think about a complete security program, there are many areas of responsibility, from infrastructure security to network security, data security, application security. Then you have these vertical security monitoring operation tools and for threat preventions and all of these things, to endpoints to manage identities, right? And the government risk and compliance. So with Google Cloud, we provide this capability across GCP, workspace, and connected device that covers the entire stack. Again, the end-to-end solution that we provide, or I mentioned earlier. So this slide just shows some of the GCP services that helps you in each area. I'm not going to dive too deep into these services, but you'll have the deck as a reference after the presentation. We also have an extensive ecosystem of security technology partners that complements and augments our native capabilities. You see all of the big names here in Imperva, Cisco, obviously Barracuda, and more. Now, this is another differentiating feature that, speaking of native capabilities, where one of them is the access transparency. what it does is that it provides a near real-time logs whenever Google administrators access your environment on the Google Cloud for support call or support case scenarios. So this is really, really unique provided by Google, where with access approval, it even lets you approve or deny the request by Google employees or Google support team working to support your case. So this helps you to bring your audit controls closer to perhaps your current conditions. Now, another differentiating feature is called VPC Service Controls. What this feature really do is it allows you to configure even a security perimeter within all of the where around the data resources, basically, that controls the data movement across the perimeter boundary. So the primary goal of this service is to prevent data exfiltration that was not stopped or by any other means, such as IAMs and firewalls, or maybe a misconfiguration in IAM or firewall configuration. VPC service control adds another layer of defense for you. Now, most of organizations don't store as much security data as they like to. And the reason really is because once they collect it, searching through that data to get some actionable insight, it's just simply too slow. But with these Chronicle security and analytics specifically, you don't have to really worry about them anymore because you can keep petabytes of security data from a myriad of sources, and it allows you to hunt for security threats and perform sub-second searches against these petabytes of data, something that's almost impossible with existing tools. So you can hunt at the Google speed and scale, and also offers modern threat detections. It also integrates seamlessly with partner SIEM solutions such as Splunk and those tools. So very useful tool here. Now I want to talk to you guys a little bit about Google's commitment making Google services secure and compliant, as well as how Google can help you with your compliance effort. So as you see here, this is just an eye chart of all of the compliance and certifications that Google offer. Now this should cover most, if not all, the use cases out there. From US, there's a HIPAA, HITRUST, FedRAMP, and then from global, from SOC 1, 2, 3, and PCI, and also going over to Europe with GDPR, as one of the attendees had a question about. All of these certifications and compliances are here to help you to make your workloads compliant in Google Cloud. But go ahead.
I was just going to add one other thing there. So another use case, I was working with a retailer, and we actually had to go through this very thing on this slide. Before they did any business with GCP, their thoughts were, we need to make sure we have complete compliance. What can you do with regard to your domain? How can you make sure things are secure? And as you mentioned, right, with the VPC Service Controls, what actually do you have in place to foundationally make sure we can authenticate and then authorize all of our users wherever they might happen to be? So in that regard, we basically needed to start from this slide here and kind of work backwards to a solution to make sure that when we looked at the organization as a whole, we could specifically find out how the security postures would take place, what we would do with the workloads, and then more importantly, applications. So these compliances here, which mean all the providers today are pretty similar in that regard, but with regard to Google, this is something that we've needed to show to make sure that customers are comfortable.
Yep. Very good. Yeah, that definitely is important to a lot of the customers, especially around compliant regulatory environments such as hospitals and those type of things. I have a couple hospital customers that are very keen on the services that are actually HIPAA eligible and HITRUST eligible. So yeah, definitely. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. With any specific compliance eligibility, we can definitely help you to work through that, as Wayne kind of mentioned. let's see here. Now, one of the things that's pretty cool, in my opinion, was that the Google provides services that that are eligible for compliance and certifications, right, in the previous slide. But also as part of shared responsibility, the customer is responsible to ensure their applications and solutions are compliant to the industry standards that they are obliged to, right? So we heard from the customer time and time again that it is really painful and time-consuming to map out those compliance controls to actual implementation in the technology that's being used in GCP. So with the Google Assured Workload, we can actually help to configure your cloud environment to confidently secure and configure your sensitive workload to support your compliance requirement. So simply just choose your security setting, and then Google will put the necessary cloud control in place for you. It's a repeatable deployment and has the compliance enforcement that you can actually present it to your auditors. So what's really next? You can learn more about with cloud security workshops with relevant stakeholders, and then build a plan, right? You want to identify the potential cloud project, reach out to us if you have any questions, and then define the control objectives. Then innovate, really implement new capabilities, automate those security operations with the tools that we kind of mentioned to you today. And reach out to us if you have any questions. We're happy to answer any questions and work with you to make your workload and your environment more secure and not like that the egg that we showed you earlier.
And Tristan, I added that last slide for
Yes,
Command
sir.
Center.
This
Yep.
one?
Awesome. Yeah, so I just wanted the audience to see this, that when you start to think about Google, you start using the console, you start to figure out how it can form and shape your business. One of the things that, again, this was an exercise that we had to do a while ago with a company that was built in the cloud. They built their whole real estate business in regards to using the cloud. They were trying to figure out, could we use Google? Could we expose? Could we find some of the vulnerabilities in our applications and our stack to make sure that we will be secure? Because after all, right, we're dealing with people's livelihoods, their homes, their properties, their social security numbers, etc. So one of the things we did is we took this tool right here that you see on Tristan's screen there around SEC, and Tristan had just dropped off there. And we made sure that we start putting in some of their applications. We took the specific workloads, and then everything on the far left there in SEC, you'll see that you have a whole gamut of things to make sure that you're compliant on. So in a very short summary, the idea behind this is that if you look at your entire stack of security, when you elect to use Google, a lot of that can be baked and wrapped and seen through here. The vulnerabilities, the visibility stacks, what you're doing with the security guidance, it makes and recommends different things to you. So we really wanted to make sure that you had a couple of key examples. So in summary, for that one customer, they were able to find about 200 different vulnerabilities. Some of them, a handful of them were critical to their business, but the vast majority of them were low to middle with regard to severity. So we were able to find some things that were impactful to their business. So may that be the same thing for you and your organization, that perhaps as you're kind of picking and choosing what should be best, what should be used, then you'll have some means to do so with regard to our tools. And with that, we really appreciate your time today. And